1. Nicholas William Nick Gage Wilson bank robbery. Nicholas William Wilson, known to wrestling fans around the world as Nick Gage, was once one of the most infamous figures in hardcore wrestling. Born in Philadelphia, Nick Gage became the face of Combat Zone Wrestling, its first heavyweight champion and the winner of brutal tournaments like Tournament of Death and King of the Death Match. He was a performer celebrated for surviving barbed wire and glass in the ring. Inside the ring, he was celebrated for his fearless, bloody performances. But outside the ropes, Nick Gage's life had spiraled into addiction and instability. Years of injuries and painkiller abuse had left him dependent on OxyContin. And by late 2010, he had been evicted, was homeless, and living in a haze of desperation. On December 22, 2010, that desperation reached a breaking point. Surveillance cameras at a PNC bank in Collingswood, New Jersey, captured a man in dark clothing handing a teller a note that demanded cash and warned of lethal consequences if she didn't comply. The robber fled with roughly $3,000 in cash. But what shocked investigators came next as fans recognized the man in the footage. It was Nick Gage, the deathmatch wrestler who had been a fixture in New Jersey's independent wrestling scene. Within days, Gage's name hit local headlines. The FBI and Collingswood police released the surveillance images to the public, and after realizing the situation was spiraling, Nick Gage turned himself in on December 31, 2010. According to court records and local reports, he admitted to robbing the bank to support his addiction. On March 15, 2011, in a New Jersey state court, Nick Gage pleaded guilty to second-degree robbery as part of a plea agreement. That December, a judge formally sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. He was also ordered to pay $150 in restitution to the bank teller who had been traumatized by the encounter. 2. Harrison Hardbody Harrison Norris Jr., sex trafficking and forced labor. Harrison Norris Jr. once stood in the wrestling ring as Hardbody Harrison, a U.S. Army veteran who served in the Gulf War before reinventing himself as a professional wrestler under World Championship Wrestling in the 1990s. Outside the spotlight, he ran fitness programs and promoted himself as a trainer who could help women build wrestling careers. But what looked like opportunity turned into coercion, violence, and exploitation. By 2004, police in Smyrna, Georgia, began investigating after several women escaped his home and reported being held against their will. Federal prosecutors later revealed that Harrison Norris Jr. had lured vulnerable women, some homeless, some struggling with addiction, by promising them wrestling training and financial support. Once inside his 2 homes in Bartow County, he imposed strict rules, confiscated identification documents, and forced them to work as dancers or prostitutes. Investigators found contracts that described women owing debts to him, surveillance cameras throughout his home, and ledgers tracking earnings from commercial sex. According to trial evidence presented in federal court in Atlanta, Harrison orchestrated what prosecutors called a scheme of sex trafficking and forced labor using psychological control, violence, and threats. Witnesses testified about being beaten, isolated, and required to memorize commandments that dictated obedience. He maintained a hierarchy among the women, some serving as recruiters, while others were punished for disobedience. In November 2007, after a lengthy federal trial, a jury found Harrison Norris Jr. guilty on multiple counts of sex trafficking, involuntary servitude, and forced labor. On April 1, 2008, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia sentenced him to life imprisonment. The Department of Justice called the case one of the earliest federal prosecutions of human trafficking under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Harrison appealed, arguing that his trial was unfair and his sentence excessive. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals later affirmed his convictions, but sent the case back for resentencing. After review, his punishment was reduced to 35 years in federal prison, where he remains incarcerated to this day. Tammy Lynn Sonny, SYTCH DUI manslaughter. Tammy SYTCH, once known to wrestling fans around the world as Sonny, lived a life defined by extremes: fame, downfall, and ultimately tragedy. In the mid-1990s, she became one of the most recognizable figures in professional wrestling. Her charisma and popularity made her the most downloaded celebrity on America Online in 1996 and earned her a place in the WWE Hall of Fame in 2011. But behind the spotlight, her personal life was spiraling. Over the years, her name became synonymous with a long list of arrests, from multiple driving under the influence charges to driving on suspended licenses, violating protective orders, and fleeing the scene of accidents. Between 2012 and 2021, she was arrested at least half a dozen times across several states, with judges repeatedly warning her that her drinking and driving would one day cost a life. That day came on March 25, 2022 in Ormond Beach, Florida. Investigators say Sunny Switech was driving a 2012 Mercedes-Benz when she failed to stop at a red light and slammed into a stopped vehicle. The impact pushed that car into another, killing 75-year-old Julian Leffler at the scene. Toxicology reports later showed her blood alcohol level was between 0.32 and 0.36, roughly 4 times the legal limit. Police also discovered an open bottle of vodka in her car. She was arrested in May 2022 and charged with DUI manslaughter, driving with a suspended license causing death, and multiple counts of DUI causing injury and property damage. In August 2023, she entered a no-contest plea. During sentencing, prosecutors described her as a danger to society, citing her long, repeated pattern of alcohol-related offenses. On November 27, 2023, in a Volusia County courtroom, the judge handed down her final punishment, sentencing Tammy Lynn Sunny Switech to 17 years in Florida State Prison, followed by 8 years of probation with credit for the time she had already served. In court, Sunny said she lived every day with regret and remorse deep inside her soul. 4. Kenneth Wayne Patera, battery and obstruction. Late on the night of April 6, 1984, Olympic weightlifter and professional wrestler Ken Patera stopped at a McDonald's restaurant in Waukesha, Wisconsin after a wrestling event. The restaurant had already closed, and when employees refused to serve him, the confrontation turned destructive. Shortly after Patera left, someone hurled a large boulder through the restaurant's window, shattering the glass. Patera has always denied throwing the rock, later insisting that it was done by a disgruntled former employee of the restaurant, not him. When Waukesha police officers arrived at the motel where Ken Patera and fellow wrestler Masa Saito were staying, the situation again escalated into a violent altercation. According to police reports and court records, officers attempting to question the wrestlers were met with resistance that turned into a fight inside the motel room. One female officer suffered multiple injuries, including a broken leg, fractured teeth, and a ruptured appendix as officers were struck with furniture and other objects. Before the incident, Ken Patera had been one of the most celebrated American weightlifters of his era, a 4-time U.S. super heavyweight champion from 1969 to 1972, the first American to clean and jerk over 500 pounds, and a member of the 1972 U.S. Olympic team. He later transitioned into professional wrestling, where he became a WWF Intercontinental Champion in 1980 and an NWA Missouri Heavyweight Champion, making him one of the top villains in wrestling during the early 1980s. However, the Waukesha motel fight marked a dramatic fall from that success. Patera was charged and convicted of battery and obstructing an officer alongside Saito. In June 1985, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. His wrestling career stalled for several years. 5. Masanori Saito, battery and assault on police. He was once a powerhouse in professional wrestling, an Olympian who had represented Japan before turning to the brutal world of American wrestling. Masa Saito was respected for his strength, feared for his intensity, and known across the world as one of wrestling's most disciplined competitors. But being the accomplice with Ken Patera tarnished his good record. Court records and police testimony show that after the fight with the Waukesha police officers, it took several other officers and backup units to subdue the 2 men. The case quickly gained national attention as 2 professional wrestlers charged in a brawl, first with a McDonald's restaurant staff, then with police officers. At trial, prosecutors described the attack as a rampage, while the defense claimed it was self-defense after a misunderstanding. Saito was sentenced to 2 years in prison, the same as Ken Patera. During his incarceration, he worked in the kitchen and reportedly kept to himself, later saying the experience taught him humility. By the time he was released for good behavior, he had become a different man, one who even created a new wrestling hold inspired by his time behind bars. 6. Alvin Antonio MVP Burke Jr. armed robbery. Before the world knew him as Montel Vontavious Porter, MVP, he was Alvin Antonio Burke Jr., a teenager growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Opelika and Liberty City, Florida. By his mid-teens, Burke had fallen in with a local gang, and what began as petty trouble soon escalated into violent crime. On January 14, 1990, when he was just 16 years old, Burke and two accomplices executed a bold armed robbery aboard the Discovery I, a cruise ship docked at Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale. The trio smuggled guns onto the vessel, forced casino employees into a utility room, and escaped with roughly $81,000 in cash. Within days, investigators tracked them down and Burke was arrested and charged with multiple counts of armed robbery and armed kidnapping. In court, prosecutors detailed the meticulously planned heist, emphasizing that the victims had been held at gunpoint during the ordeal. Facing overwhelming evidence, Burke pleaded guilty to 10 felony counts and in 1990 was sentenced to 18.5 years in the Florida prison system. He ultimately served about 9.5 years before being released in the late 1990s. During his incarceration, he spent long stretches in maximum security facilities where he immersed himself in education and fitness and began to rethink the path his life had taken. After his release, Burke reinvented himself completely under the ring name Montel Vontavious Porter. He trained under Norman Smiley and Soulman Alex G. and entered professional wrestling in the early 2000s. By 2006, he had signed with WWE, where his charisma and athleticism made him one of the company's standout stars. MVP went on to capture the United States Championship twice, win the WWE Tag Team titles with Matt Hardy, and later claimed the IWGP Intercontinental Championship in Japan. But his past never left him entirely. His felony record even caused visa complications during his international career. Still, his story stands out as one of transformation. From a teenage armed robber serving nearly a decade behind bars to a global wrestling figure who now mentors at-risk youth, Montel Vontavious Porter turned a life of crime and punishment into one of redemption and reinvention. 7. Jeffrey Nero Jeff Hardy drug trafficking. Jeff Hardy was born in Cameron, North Carolina, and rose from a small-town dreamer to one of professional wrestling's biggest stars. As one half of the Hardy Boys alongside his brother Matt, he revolutionized the tag team division with death-defying stunts and fearless charisma. His singles career reached its peak in December 2008 when he captured the WWE Championship, solidifying his place among wrestling's elite. But behind the charismatic enigma persona, Jeff Hardy's personal struggles with substance abuse had long shadowed his career. On September 11, 2009, Moore County Sheriff's deputies executed a search warrant at his home in Cameron, North Carolina. Inside, they found an extensive quantity of controlled substances: 262 Vicodin pills, 180 Soma pills, approximately 555 milliliters of anabolic steroids, a small amount of powder cocaine, and various items of drug paraphernalia. The discovery led to multiple felony charges, including trafficking in opium, possession with intent to sell or deliver a Schedule III controlled substance, maintaining a dwelling for keeping controlled substances, possession of cocaine, and a misdemeanor charge for drug paraphernalia. After nearly 2 years of court delays, Jeff Hardy entered a guilty plea in September 2011 to 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver and 1 count of conspiracy to traffic in opium. The court accepted his plea, acknowledging the severity of the offenses, but also his cooperation and rehabilitation efforts during that time. Jeff Hardy was sentenced to 10 days in jail, 30 months of probation, and ordered to pay a $100,000 fine. 8. Cain Ramirez Velasquez attempted murder. Cain Velasquez was once celebrated as one of the most dominant heavyweights in mixed martial arts. Born in Salinas, California, and raised in Yuma, Arizona, he rose through the ranks of Arizona State University wrestling before entering the UFC. His career exploded when on October 23, 2010, he defeated Brock Lesnar at UFC 121, becoming the first heavyweight champion of Mexican descent. Velasquez's relentless pace and wrestling power made him a 2-time UFC heavyweight champion, earning global respect before injuries began to shadow his career. After leaving MMA, he transitioned into professional wrestling, joining WWE and later performing in Mexico's Lucha Libre AAA Worldwide. But in early 2022, everything changed. On February 28, 2022 in San Jose, California, Velasquez pursued a truck carrying 3 people, one of whom was Harry Eugene Goularde, a man accused of molesting Velasquez's 4-year-old son. During the high-speed chase through the South Bay, Velasquez rammed the vehicle and fired several shots from his registered .40 caliber handgun. The bullet struck the driver, Paul Bender, who was Goulard's stepfather, wounding him in the arm and torso and severing his brachial artery. The chase sped past a school as children were being released for the day, drawing alarm from witnesses and law enforcement. Velasquez was arrested shortly after and booked into Santa Clara County Jail. Prosecutors charged him with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and multiple gun offenses. He remained in custody for roughly 8 months before being granted bail under strict conditions. In August 2024, he entered a no-contest plea to 1 felony count of attempted murder and related charges, admitting responsibility for the shooting while avoiding a lengthy trial. On March 24, 2025, in a Santa Clara County courtroom, Judge Jessica Delgado sentenced Cain Velasquez to 5 years in California State Prison. The court acknowledged the emotional motive behind his actions, but emphasized the grave risk to innocent lives. 9. Lawrence Wendell Lex Luger Fall drug possession and probation violation. Lawrence Wendell Fall, better known to the wrestling world as Lex Luger, was once one of the most celebrated names in professional wrestling, a powerhouse known as the Total Package. He held multiple championships, including the WCW World Heavyweight title and the NWA/WCW United States Heavyweight Championship, and even shared the spotlight in WWE's 1994 Royal Rumble. But behind the fame, his personal life was spiraling into chaos. In April 2003, police were called to Lex Luger's home in Marietta, Georgia, where his girlfriend, former wrestling valet Miss Elizabeth Hewlett, was found with bruises. Lex Luger was arrested and charged with misdemeanor battery. Just 2 days later, he was arrested again, this time for driving under the influence while his license was suspended. Then on May 1, 2003, tragedy struck when Miss Elizabeth was found unresponsive in their townhouse. She was later pronounced dead from acute toxicity caused by a mix of painkillers and vodka. When police searched Luger's home after her death, they found a large stash of anabolic steroids, oxycodone, growth hormone, and testosterone. He was arrested once again and eventually pleaded guilty to 13 felony counts of drug possession, receiving 5 years of probation. But Luger's legal troubles didn't end there. In December 2005, while traveling to an independent wrestling event, he was removed from a flight from Minneapolis to Winnipeg. Because he was on probation, he was required to obtain permission before leaving the country. That failure to notify his probation officer counted as a violation of his probation, and the court revoked it. Lex Luger was sentenced to serve approximately 4 months in the Cobb County Jail in Georgia. His time behind bars marked the low point of a career once filled with fame, athleticism, and adoration. 10. Booker T. Huffman Jr., armed robbery. Booker T was born in Houston, Texas, and had a troubled start long before his rise to wrestling fame. After losing both parents at a young age, he dropped out of school and began working at a local Wendy's to support himself and his young son. But life took a dark turn in the late 1980s when Booker T and several coworkers devised a plan that would change everything. They decided to rob the very fast food restaurants they worked for. Over a span of several months in 1987, Booker T and his accomplices carried out a string of armed robberies targeting multiple Wendy's locations in Houston. The crew wore their work uniforms during the crimes, using insider knowledge of schedules and cash routines to their advantage. Each robbery netted anywhere from a few hundred to several $1,000s. It didn't take long for police to suspect that the crimes were inside jobs. And by April 1987, Booker T was arrested and identified by witnesses as one of the gunmen. Later that year, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated robbery. The court sentenced him to 5 years in a Texas state prison. Booker T served approximately 19 months before being paroled in April 1992. During his incarceration, he earned his GED and vowed to turn his life around. After his release, Booker T took steady work and eventually followed his older brother Stevie Ray Huffman into professional wrestling. Under the name Booker T, he built one of the most successful careers in wrestling history, winning multiple world titles, becoming a 2-time WWE Hall of Fame inductee, and transforming his story of crime and redemption into a message of perseverance.